Hello and welcome back to Ponder Policy, where today we'll be taking a look at the 2026, 2028, and 2030 U.S. Senate elections and what those implications will be on the control and makeup of the U.S. Senate in the near future. It's my current prediction that Democrats are going to have a very difficult time both obtaining control and maintaining control of the U.S. Senate in the next few election cycles, just by the design of the U.S. Senate and the current demographics of the states right now. What I mean by that is because the Senate is equal representation, there are 2 senators per 50 states for a total of 100 senators, as opposed to proportional representation like the House of Representatives. Democrats are less favored. States like California and New York, very populous and democratic, each get 2 senators, whereas states like Montana and Idaho, very Republican but very sparsely populated, still also get 2 senators. If you take all of the states that Donald Trump won by over 10 percentage points in the previous election and gave them each 2 Republican senators, you would have a total of 48 GOP senators as a floor. As for the Democrats, if you applied the same math, states that Harris won by over 10 points, so safe margins, you would have about 24 senators for the Democratic Party as a floor. The Republicans have a much higher floor and a much higher ceiling as a result, where the Democrats have a much lower floor and a much lower ceiling, just by the way that the Senate is designed. The Republican Party currently controls 53 seats in the Senate to Democrats' 45, but they have 2 independents who caucus with them, so it's really 47. And for a party to have control of the Senate, they need 50 seats or 51 seats if they have an administration of the opposite party. Currently, it looks like Republicans are going to be able to at least maintain, if not improve upon, their Senate majority. I'll be filling out a best case scenario for Republicans. I've already filled in states that are unlikely to flip, while they still could in the next few years. We don't really know everything about every race. These are the states that are most likely to be competitive, is the ones I'll be filling out, and also going to the best case scenario for Democrats. The 2026 election, the election that's coming up next year, these various senators were last elected in 2020, and you see a lot of similar trends across the country. States that went solidly for Donald Trump voted pretty solidly for Republican senators. States that went pretty solidly for Joe Biden went pretty solidly for Democratic senators. And that's the same thing that's happening in the swing states. The closest margins in the 2020 election were the closest margins on the Senate level. Michigan, Georgia, and North Carolina especially. And when we go over to the 2026 election, your swing states are about the same. Maine, despite having Democratic wins nationally in the previous few years, Susan Collins has been a very good candidate for the GOP in Maine recently, and also a lot of prominent statewide Democrats have declined to run against her for this upcoming election in favor of running for the governorship. I have Maine going for the Republican Party, Minnesota for the Democrats, furthest to the left of the Rust Belt, and while it may be gradually trending toward the Republican Party, 2026 is not quite there yet. It's also a midterm election. I think Democrats are favored. North Carolina is the most consistently Republican of the 3 remaining states, and even if you have a weaker Senate candidate, it's likely to remain a Republican state. This is also the only state remaining that has an incumbent Republican senator. Michigan and Georgia have incumbent Democrats, meaning that if Democrats win the state of North Carolina, they pick up 1 seat, whereas they're defending more ground, and if Republicans win the 3 remaining seats, they pick up 2 seats and would expand their margin to 55 seats. Democrats, I think right now, are just barely favored in Georgia. While this is a more traditionally Republican state, Jon Ossoff, the incumbent Democratic senator, is a pretty good candidate who beat Dave Perdue in 2020 and outperformed Biden within the state by well over a point. I do think that he benefits from having Brian Kemp, the incumbent Republican governor, declining to run for the Senate seat. It's going to be a very tight race, could go either way. I think Democrats are narrowly favored. In Michigan, you're likely to get Mike Rogers, who narrowly lost in the 2024 Michigan Senate race, running again. He's actually a strong candidate, and in an off-year election, it's going to be contentious. You have a retiring Democratic senator from the state. It's going to be up in the air, but I do think Democrats are narrowly favored. And applying this to our best-case scenarios, you could have best-case scenario for Republicans, Democrats are likely still winning the state of Minnesota. Republicans are still taking Maine. but a Republican sweep of Michigan, Georgia, and North Carolina would bring their total up to 55 seats. Best case scenario for Democrats, winning in Minnesota, still losing in Maine. This is not an impossible flip, it's just not very likely right now. And a full sweep would only net them one seat, as I've said, so they would be up to a total of 48 seats after 2026, not having a Senate majority during the Trump administration. To 2028, you have more swingy, competitive states going back to when these senators were last elected in 2022. You have Wisconsin, Ohio, and North Carolina, which Republicans are defending, versus Democrats who have to defend Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. These are stronger Democratic candidates in these states, but it's still a lot of ground to cover. Republicans are still likely to win Ohio, even if Sherrod Brown, the previous Democratic senator who lost their race in 2024, makes a comeback. It's still a traditionally Republican state and most likely to go for Republicans. In 2028, we don't have a lot of information about the presidential race at the time. That will greatly impact how a lot of these Senate races go, and I expect there to be a lot of consistency between the presidential election results state by state and the Senate results. In general, I would expect that Republicans might perform better in North Carolina. It's still the most consistently Republican of those remaining states. In Wisconsin, I believe you have a Senate retirement of the incumbent Republican senator, so it might be difficult for them to field opposition. But also, a lot of these states really will depend on how the presidential election goes, so it could go either way. Going to our best and worst case scenarios, Republicans would maintain their seat in Wisconsin, pick up a seat in Pennsylvania, maintain their seat in North Carolina. They could pick up a seat in Georgia. They could pick up a seat in Nevada. And if I'm not mistaken, this is Mark Kelly's seat in Arizona, who won a dominant race against a fairly strong Republican candidate in 2022. I still think in a best case scenario for Republicans, Mark Kelly is still likely to win in Arizona. And of course, Ohio is still a Republican state at the end of the day. Going to the Democratic side, if they maintain their seats in Nevada, in Arizona, in Georgia, and in Pennsylvania, they still lose Ohio. I still don't think that's very likely, even if they have a good performance nationally with a presidential candidate. They could pick up a seat in Wisconsin, and they could pick up a seat in North Carolina, and that brings their total up to about 50 U.S. senators, but it's still difficult math getting across the finish line because in 2030, there's just a lot of ground for Democrats to defend. These were the senators last elected in 2024, and of these competitive states, the only real competitive state that Republicans hold on defense is Pennsylvania, where Dave McCormick won very narrowly in 2024. Ohio, at this point, going to be solidly in the Republican Party. If there's a Democratic administration, I think Republicans are going to perform very well, seeing as it's midterms. If it's a Republican administration, Democrats may perform very well. But again, the best case scenario if they flip one Republican seat here. So I would expect that Republicans may be able to hold on to Pennsylvania by pretty good margins. And given that this is an election against Ruben Gallego that Kari Lake lost in 2024, it's entirely possible that a more traditional Republican candidate in Arizona does very well. This is 6 years down the line, so don't really know what's going to be happening. But going over to our best and worst case scenarios, a best case scenario for Republicans would see them maintaining their seat in Pennsylvania, maintaining their seat in Ohio, winning in Michigan, winning in Wisconsin, winning in Nevada, winning in Arizona, and I still think that Democrats are favored to win in Minnesota. But going over to Democrats' best case scenario, even if they defend all of this territory and hold on to all of these very competitive states, and they pick up Pennsylvania in 2030, their Senate majority would be 51 seats, best case scenario. For Republicans, they would have a filibuster-proof, i.e. more than 60 senators, 62-seat Senate majority in a best case scenario. Do I think that either one of these scenarios are entirely likely? No. Do I think that they're possible? Absolutely. It's most likely that someplace between these two numbers comes in. We also haven't accounted for states like New Jersey or Minnesota or Texas becoming more competitive going forward. But just showing these margins, the floor for Democrats is so much lower and the ceiling for Republicans is so much higher that they have a real path, the Republican Party, to a 62-seat Senate majority, whereas Democrats are just barely scraping by. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe, and thank you all for watching.